coming up marking the first anniversary of the Jewish Center shootings in Overland Park. Low-wage protests expand in Kansas City, but are they having an impact? The Missouri governor picks a new state auditor just as more details emerge on Tom Schweik's suicide. And should the mayor know better in this tax week why Sly James is forced to defend himself for non-payment of taxes? Hello again, I'm Nick Haynes. It's good to have you with us on the program that goes beyond the soundbite and takes you behind the headlines, making news in Kansas City. Pouring through those stories with us this week, Kansas City Star political columnist and the host of Up to Date on KCUR-FM, Steve Kraske. From the Pitch newspaper, Steve Vockrodt. From The Call, senior writer Eric Wesson. And Star reporter, columnist and blogger Dave Helling. 2 months after the shocking suicide death of Missouri State Auditor Tom Schweik, Governor Jay Nixon has finally appointed his replacement.
The people of Missouri have my commitment that I will be an independent watchdog that reviews all levels of government with even-handedness and integrity. As the governor
Boone County Treasurer Nicole Galloway will serve the 3.5 years remaining of Tom Schweik's term. She is a Democrat. By the way, Boone County is where Columbia, Missouri is located. Of all the people that Jay Nixon could have picked for this post, why Nicole Galloway?
Well, one big reason, Nick, is that Nicole Galloway has the fire in the belly to run for election to this office in 2018. Democrats wanted somebody who would be around for a while and hold this office. She's young. She's got upward mobility, upward potential. Democrats are very high on her.
Now, you told us on this program, Eric, there was a big push to have the very first African-American statewide elected office holder in the state's history. Why didn't that happen?
I think the politics of it got in the way. In St. Louis, you had a situation where the elected officials there in St. Louis were on Nixon about Ferguson. And here you had the relationship between Jay Nixon and Freedom Incorporated has never been cleared up. So you didn't have a real push or the governor's ear or somebody that could get to the governor because he kind of shuns away from the Missouri Legislative Black Caucus. So you didn't have the people that would go in to make a good case and a good argument for an appointment of an African American.
You know, Tom Schweik was a Republican. Nicole Galloway is a Democrat. Republicans complaining this week, Dave Helling, the governor should have picked a Republican. Is that the way the game should be played?
Never.
Okay, all right.
No, I mean, maybe it should be played, but it isn't. The power to make the appointment belongs to the incumbent governor. He happens to be a Democrat. He's going to pick a Democrat. There's nothing in the statute or the Constitution to suggest something otherwise. Steve's right. I think he did want to pick someone who had a future in the office. The auditor's position is pretty important to the people of Missouri, but it's very important to office holders because an auditor of the opposite party can spend most of his or her term picking on the governor and picking apart his achievements. Tom Schweik sued Jay Nixon over his withholdings from the budget, so it can be a very aggressive dynamic between the auditor and the governor if they're of different parties, and now that's over.
You know, it just seems to me one big question here, Nick, is, did the governor miss a bet by not picking an African-American for this job? The state of Missouri has never had a black official in statewide office in its history. So here was an opportunity to rectify that, particularly in the wake of Ferguson. Jay Nixon looked at a couple of candidates, including a lawmaker from Kansas City, Gail Beatty, and took a pass. You did hear that maybe some of those candidates weren't as fired up about running for office and holding it, but still you have to wonder, given the damage here and the way the Democrats need to put their party back together again, if Nixon should have righted this wrong of state history of never having a black in a statewide office and pick someone and try to make it right.
Now, also this week, a new report is released on the death of Tom Schweik. In that report, it's revealed that the late auditor had talked about suicide for years. His wife acknowledged he talked about ending his life while cleaning his firearms. And there's the revelation that Schweik was suffering from Crohn's disease, a debilitating digestive disorder that his wife believes contributed to her husband's stress and his ultimate suicide. But do these latest revelations refocus the conversation away from allegations of political bullying, Steve Vockrodt?
Well, I think it provides a bit more context to the type of person Tom Schweik was. We've talked a little bit about this show, and I've heard from some of my contacts who knew Tom that he was a good person, but he was also deeply troubled in some respects. He would ruminate over slights that, some real and some perceived. And the portrait that was painted in this latest report is somebody who struggled with this for his life, throughout much of his life. And the pressure of running for governor and perhaps this whispering campaign. Who really knows? Who really knows what goes on in the mind of a suicidal person? May have just been too much.
Dave.
There's a real intense battle going on among Republican operatives in the Schweik camp, if you will, and the anti-Schweik camp to define what happened. Because if Tom Schweik's suicide was an isolated event by an irrational man, mentally troubled, then it has no larger lessons for anyone really in the political realm in terms of the nature of campaigns, negative ads, whisper campaigns. We can go back to business as usual. But if you buy the Schweik side argument that at least in part, the whisper campaign, the radio ad, other things that were troubling to Tom Schweik played some role in his decision, if that's the eventual verdict on this tragedy, then it might change politics in the state of Missouri. It might convince people not to be so negative. So the war is, which is right, was he just sick or was there something more to it? And that the jury is quite out on that, and both sides are still arguing with each other about that.
You know, I agree with most of what Dave just said, but I do think the narrative is changing slowly. This notion that Steve was talking about of Tom Schweik being a troubled man, there's now evidence for that he really was struggling at the end of his life. And the proof of that seems to be a growing part of this narrative is that John Hancock, the new chairman of the Republican Party, who's been accused of leading this whispering campaign against Tom Schweik, today, Nick, he is still chairman of the Missouri Republican Party. He's been able to survive this, I think in part at least, because the narrative is changing, more questions being raised about just how troubled Tom Schweik was at the end of his life.
One of his competitors, though, for governor, Catherine Hanaway, is sort of in a sense of distancing herself from the radio ad that had labeled Tom Schweik as a sort of Barney Fife character. Jeff Rowe was the political consultant, now saying this week in an article that you wrote, Dave Helling, talking about the fact that he actually purchased that ad. It had nothing to do with the Catherine Hanaway campaign. He purchased the ad out of his own money. Is that based on a concern at this point, then, that Catherine Hanaway is feeling that it's affecting her campaign?
Well, first, tip of the cap, Steve Kraske was the one who got the quote from Jeff.
Thanks a lot.
Put in the story, so we put that in there. But, you know, every once in a while, Kraske stumbles across a decent story. But the reality is that Catherine Hanaway is concerned about her alleged connection not only to Jeff Rowe but to John Hancock and to the other parts of this story involving Tom Schweik. And you get the sense, particularly since at least 5 other Republicans now say they're thinking about getting in the race, including Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder, that other Republicans think she's quite vulnerable on this, and she is not the overwhelming favorite that she was 3 months ago. And I think the Schweik suicide plays into that calculation. So I think she's worried about it. I think Jeff is worried about it on her behalf. I think other Republicans think she's vulnerable. That's why the argument over what happened to Tom Schweik is still so aggressive on both sides of the Republican
Let's just put
Party.
those names up, by the way, on our screen here. As Dave mentioned, we got an increasingly crowded primary now potentially for the Republican nomination. Former Missouri House Speaker Catherine Hanaway may be joined in the race, as Dave said, by Lieutenant Governor Pete Kinder, who says he's weighing a run. So is businessman and former U.S. Senate candidate John Brunner, and State Senator Mike Parson, who has decried the political incivility in campaigns that he claims drove Schweik to his death. Eric.
And I think that there's something in the report that was something that was in the back of people's mind about sexual preferences, about him possibly being gay and being blackmailed about it. And I think that that was one of the things that was interesting and in the back of a lot of people's minds, but nobody wanted to say anything about it. And I thought that looking at the report, that was an interesting scenario that they had added to that
And they did look at that allegation of potential blackmail, as Eric is suggesting, but they found no evidence of that, Steve.
No evidence at this point, and that would be explosive, of course,
Yes.
if that came out, Nick.
All right. Now, a year ago this week, our metro was making news around the world. This week marks the 1-year anniversary of the shooting deaths at the Jewish Community Center and Village Shalom.
There's a guy with a rifle here shooting at people. I would leave.
Is he still here?
I don't know.
4 or 5 shots have been fired into the front door. There's a male with a shotgun.
I knew as soon as I came upon my dad that he was in heaven.
They literally had just pulled into a parking place, and I opened the doors to get out. They were ambushed.
We got 2 down. That's all we're aware of this time.
Investigators say Cross didn't stop there. He then drove to a nearby Jewish assisted living facility and shot and killed Terry Lamanno, who was visiting her mother.
This morning, our prayers are with the people of Overland Park.
Our dad and my son were at the wrong place at the wrong time for a split second.
That idiot absolutely knocked a family to its knees for no reason.
Innocent people were killed. Their families were devastated. And this violence has struck at the heart of the Jewish community in Kansas City.
We have unquestionably determined through the work of local and federal law enforcement agencies that this was a hate crime.
We are aware of his existence. We are aware that he was affiliated with certain hate groups.
Heal those whose minds have been blinded by bigotry, whose hearts have been haunted by hatred, whose souls have been perverted by prejudice.
We want something good to come out of this. We don't know what that's going to be.
Although our hearts are truly broken, all Americans stand with the people of Overland Park, of Leawood, and of Kansas City. We are united in our condemnation of this heinous attack and in our commitment to see that justice is served.
A look back at the events of a year ago. This week, balloon releases and around 3,000 people gathering at the Jewish Community Center, the starting point of a 3-mile peace walk from the Jewish campus to the Church of the Resurrection, the culmination of a week-long series of activities. But how have things changed on our metro as a result of the shootings? Have they changed, Steve?
Well, I think the remarkable thing, and it's really remarkable, and that was just a beautiful piece, by the way, is how this community pulled together in the aftermath of this thing to support Mindy Corporan, to support her and the families who were involved here. I had a rabbi on my radio show just a couple of weeks ago talking about his Kansas City, Missouri side congregation being concerned about their safety in the aftermath of this shooting, and Police Chief Daryl Forte showing up in his parking lot and saying, "We're standing with you here. We're all together in this." Example after example after example of this community coming together to support that congregation, Village Shalom, and everywhere else. It was a beautiful thing to watch. We're stronger because of it.
Yeah, Mindy Corporan's grace through this has been just remarkable. Really astonishing.
Astonishing.
I had a chance to visit with her briefly a couple of weeks ago, and her grace is the only word you can use in the face of this unspeakable tragedy. We're still, and this part of the country, Nick, wrestles with this all the time, but Glenn Miller, the man suspected in the shootings, has a 25, 30-year history of white supremacy and anti-Jewish statements. And I think at our peril, we believe that he is somehow an isolated case, or that he's just, completely off the radar screen as the alleged perpetrator of these events. We have to. One of the things I think we need to do is be vigilant to make sure that there are not other people in our community who have similar views, who are tempted to do similar things in the future.
Well, a proliferation of hate groups does continue to concern law enforcement. KCPT is actually partnering with the Kansas City Star on a series of reports that examines efforts to combat these groups.
How many of you had an encounter with a sovereign? A few. Okay.
A sovereign basically is someone that is against our government. They don't think law enforcement has any authority over them. They don't want any leaders. They don't want anyone over them but God. They're totally anti-government, and some of them, not all, are just a serious threat to law enforcement.
An extensive report on combating hate groups this Sunday in your Kansas City Star. See more video reporting on this project from KCPT's Hale Center for Journalism at flatlandkc.org. Hundreds of low-wage workers representing fast food employees, home health care workers, and others marched this week in Kansas City as part of a national day of protest to demand a $15 an hour wage. They captured the support of Mayor Sly James, who joined the rally at Tice Park.
It is unjust. It is unreasonable. It is unforgivable.
It is unexplainable that we all live in the richest, most powerful, best country in the world, and people work 40 hours a week and cannot feed their families.
For the first time, the protest also include adjunct faculty at area universities and colleges who have their own beef with their employers. They argue adjunct professors are becoming the day laborers of academia.
Adjunct and contingent faculty face the same problems as other low-wage workers. We earn poverty wages, work off the clock, can't get full-time hours, and go to 2 or 3 jobs just to get by.
Is there any evidence that these protests and marches, though, are having any effect, Steve Ockrott?
Well, legislatively, I don't know. I mean, but this is how the conversation starts. So, you know, a few weeks back, Jermaine Reed, a city councilman, introduced an ordinance that would propose to raise the minimum wage in Kansas City. But of course, you know, Missouri law does not allow cities to do that on their own volition, or at least exceed the state's minimum wage, which is $7.65. However, since then, you're starting, you know, I mean, this conversation has been going on for a while, particularly, you know, among low-wage workers who start to feel more and more in this country like there's an expanding gap between the rich and middle class and those in poverty. And so, you know, things like these rallies, I mean, that's really getting the conversation going. Whether that moves the needle in places like Jefferson City, that's going to be a tough battle.
But this started
ahead.
as a sort of thing about McDonald's and the fast food employees, but you've got healthcare workers now part of this, and now sort of adjunct faculty. I mean, this is an expanded movement.
Absolutely, and I think Steve is so right, Nick. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. This notion of income disparity as a pivotal issue in this country, I think, is going to be coming and coming to the fore with good speed. Hillary Clinton is showing signs she's going to base much of her presidential campaign on this very issue. This may be just the start of something that gets much bigger in the months to come.
Eric.
I did a story about it this week as well, and one of the things that was interesting was in places like San Francisco and Seattle, where they raised the minimum wage, there has been no real impact on the economy other than like prices of things going up. So that was one thing that was interesting, but it also, in a different dynamic, changed people's social status as far as their tax bracket. It changed that, and a lot of companies where the people were working 40 hours now had to cut them to 35 and 30 hours, and only 70% of employees in the country are working and making minimum wage as far as their jobs are going working full-time.
There will be, or will be, a major push to put a minimum wage increase on the statewide ballot in Missouri in 2016, potentially to coincide with the presidential election in November when the turnout would be high. And the Missouri voters have shown real support for minimum wage increases in the past. And the organizers think that there will be some similar momentum this time. That's probably the most likely place that minimum wage increases will take place, at the statewide level in Missouri and other places. And it will be, I guess, a major issue in the 2016 presidential campaign.
Now, if Mayor James is so concerned about jobs, some are asking, what about the hundreds that will be lost as a result of the city's decision to impose new regulations and fees on ride-hailing services like Uber? Uber officials say new city rules could cause it to pull out of this market. Even worse, some argue, could the move give the city a bad name with the tech and entrepreneur crowds, dimming enthusiasm for new companies to set up shop here? Steve Ockrott.
Yeah, it's, you know, things really kind of came to a showdown at City Hall last week, and Uber, what they've kind of been doing, and I think what City Hall's sort of saying, is that they're taking one thing and calling it another. They're saying, you know, we're not a taxi service, so these rules shouldn't apply to us. But, you know, the city has said, well, we need to have background checks on some of your drivers, and they need to pay some license fees because that's state law. These are just the rules. And Uber's had some issues with drivers in other markets where, you know, some of their passengers became victims of crimes. And so the city's looking out for its residents. They're claiming public safety. Uber is trying to make a persuasive case that, you know, this is an anti-technology move because Uber centers around the use of a.
And the mayor was getting very angry at that, though.
Right.
Garbage, the notion that we're not working to try and get Uber in town. We're trying to work with them, and they haven't come to the negotiating table, he tells City Hall.
And I think there's something to that, Nick, that Uber has been resistant to cooperate here and do some things. They haven't really spoken publicly to the media about their side of the story. They ran out of City Hall before reporters had a chance to talk. But is there an image situation going on here? Yeah, I think there is. I mean, people who use Uber in this community love it. It's taken the nation by storm. People want this service. If Kansas City shuns it and walks away from this company, or the company walks away here, I think it's going to cause us a little bit of a black eye.
Eric.
And Steve is right. Uber, they were given the negotiations and they were asking them, okay, well, that won't work. Well, what do we need to do to make it work? Well, that won't work. And there is never a clear understanding or picture of what Uber wanted. So they kind of leave the City Hall with egg on their face like they didn't try to negotiate a deal when it really wasn't all their fault.
Transit activist Clay Chastain, who recently came in third in a three-way primary race for mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, has filed a lawsuit this week in Jackson County Circuit Court to disqualify Sly James as a mayoral candidate. Why? Chastain argues Mayor James violated the city's charter by being delinquent on his city taxes, a requirement for candidacy. Did Mayor James fail to pay his taxes, Dave Helling?
Yes, there were some delinquencies, some other problems. I think he's conceded that.
So is he going to be removed from the ballot?
Well, we don't get to decide that here, and it may be a judge that renders that decision. The chances are very, very slim. But the mayor has some problems in explaining this to people and potentially explaining it to voters. I don't think he's in any real legal or electoral danger, but it isn't something that a candidate would prefer to have on his or her resume.
Particularly in a week where people are paying their taxes, Steve Vonkrot.
Right, yeah, it's the timing is uncanny in a way. But, and this is something that critics will be able to bring up if, Sly James says we need to renew the earnings tax. That people might say, well, why don't you pay your taxes? If he's thinking about issuing bonds to improve infrastructure that could possibly be tied to a tax increase, critics of that proposal might look at him and say, well, if taxes are so important, shouldn't you pay yours on time?
Well, he's paid his taxes. He's made it right. Yeah, it looks a little bad. The problem I have with this whole episode here, Nick, is the messenger of this story, which is Clay Chastain. I thought one of the great upsets in the recent primaries was that voters rejected Clay Chastain, even in terms of giving him a chance to be in a one-on-one runoff with Mayor James come June. This is a guy who had name recognition up the wazoo, and voters now have finally said, I think once and for all, said, goodbye, good riddance to this guy.
He lost to General Lee.
Yeah, and it's time. It's time for us to move on from Clay Chastain.
Well, he says he is still a certified candidate.
He says lots of things, Nick.
Okay, all righty. Next up on Week in Review, money, money, money. While there were some raised eyebrows this week over why the Kansas City Council was paying out $225,000 to the aid of former City Councilman Michael Brooks, who had complained she'd been choked by her boss, the city was spending a whole lot more money to subsidize a brand new luxury apartment tower in the Power and Light District. The new 24-story 2-Light building will feature 300 luxury units and will be built next to the 26-story 1-Light apartment tower slated to open this fall. Critics question the subsidies, $17 million in upfront cash and 50% off the property tax bill for 25 years. Why are taxpayers who are already forking over $15 million a year to keep the Power and Light District open being asked to subsidize this project too, Steve Ockrott?
Well, part of this goes back to the original agreement that Kansas City struck with Cordish, the developer of the Power and Light District, which had an obligation to build these apartments. And they're going to argue that, well, the construction costs to build an apartment like this are so high compared to the types of rents we can charge in a city like Kansas City that we need incentives to bridge the gap. However, you're starting to see those rents in downtown Kansas City go way up. And I think it's going to be incumbent on the media and the public to challenge this conventional thinking that all apartments and all luxury condos and things like this need subsidies.
And we just saw some of the pictures there. I mean, who is actually living in these?
Well, I think one of the Kansas one of the Kansas City Star articles. Yeah, one of the Kansas City Star stories said that I think one of the Cordish executives said that the average individual income in these apartments is $100,000, and so that gives you a sort of view into the wealth that's going into those apartments.
Eric.
I think it's outlandish, $17.5 million, and we can't get a grocery store in the urban core, get the city to help in the development, enticement of a grocery store, a supermarket in the urban core. I think it's outlandish that they keep pouring money into that.
Alrighty, and finally, it's been a long time since we heard about Kansas Senator Pat Roberts, but this week he was making national news. But was it for some big public policy pronouncement?
We're going to be very aggressive on that issue as well as on the geographic preference issue.
Come on. Just let it go, Mr.
His former opponent, Steve Kraske, Milt Wolf, was surprised by it, mainly because he thought he was more of a sleeping beauty man.
Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, at least Pat's back in the news again after his election.
Some of our own
It's a
producers...
stunning thing that Pat Roberts knows how to work a cell phone, I'll say that.
Okay. Well, some of our producers are saying, talk about the incivility of it all, that he didn't even turn his cell phone off when he's supposed to be in these hearings.
Maybe he doesn't know how to turn it off. That's a possibility.
Okay, but he is at least back in the news. And that is our week in review. Thanks to our news reviewers. You can hear him weekdays at 11, keeping you up to date on 89.3 FM KCUR, Steve Kraske. And from The Call, Eric Wesson. From The Pitch, Steve Vokrot, and the Kansas City Star's Dave Helling. Now, next week, we dissect the news with 4 school superintendents as we pull back the curtain on some of the thorniest issues in education. I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us here at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.